In 1951, a foreman at a rail yard in Altoona, Pennsylvania, trained 43 men over 30 years. Not one of them ever quit on him. Not one ever cursed his name on the way out the gate. He paid the same wage every other foreman paid. He worked the same brutal hours. What he had was a code, a set of manners his own father had drilled into him before he turned 10, used on every man who stood under him. When he died in 1979, 300 people came to the funeral of a man who had only ever been a foreman. Most of what filled those pews died in the ground with him. He moved through the world differently, not with apps or scripts or weekend seminars, but with habits carved into him by parents who knew exactly what kind of man they were building. Those habits made friends, kept jobs, and held neighborhoods together for 50 years at a stretch. This was not charm. It was a craft, passed down at dinner tables and enforced without discussion, so deeply worn that the men who lived it never thought of themselves as mannered. They thought they were being raised right. Then we decided being raised right was the same as being repressed. We threw the whole code away, not because it stopped working, because we stopped wanting to look like the kind of men who needed to try. And nobody taught it to the sons, so the sons taught nothing to theirs. Number 19 on this list took less than 4 seconds and told a room how a man had been raised before he opened his mouth. Number 11 contradicts nearly every piece of advice handed to young men today, and it is the one that built more loyalty than any other. And number 3, the rule grandfathers enforced above all the rest, is now taught to corporate leaders at a retreat that costs $4,000 a seat. The old way cost a grandfather 1 sentence and a boy a lifetime of practice. Nobody charges for it. Nobody passes it down at all. These 25 manners were not about being smooth, they were about being trusted. The difference between a man who walked into a room and vanished and one who walked out of it owed a favor by 3 people who had only just met him. They were never written down. They were lived in front of a child too young to know he was being taught. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten manners American grandfathers lived by that no one teaches anymore. Number 25, stand to greet. When someone entered the room, the body moved before the mind did. You stood. A grocer in Dayton drilled it into his son through the early 50s until the boy could not stay seated if he tried. For an older man, for a woman, for a guest at the door, you rose. It cost 2 seconds and a little comfort. To the one arriving, it said the room had changed because they were in it. To the men watching it, said, here was someone raised by somebody. Staying seated said the opposite in the same instant. Rising was a sentence the body spoke before the mouth found words. Number 24. The hat came off indoors. The hat stayed on in the street and came off the second you crossed a threshold. A home, a church, an elevator, a diner with people eating. A foundry man in Gary corrected his son with one glance in 1953, and the boy's hand was at the brim before the look had finished. For a boy walking into his first job, the hat in his hands was armor. It said a father somewhere had shown him what to do here. Foremen hired that signal long before they hired the resume. The hat was nothing. Taking it off was everything. Number 23. Hold the door for whoever's behind you. You reached the door first, and you held it. No flourish, no waiting for thanks, just held until everyone was through. A machinist in Toledo taught his son in 1951 to hold it for the old, the young, the stranger, all the same. Held for everyone, it was character. Held for some and dropped on others, it was performance, and people could always tell the two apart. By 1955, the habit was so common in American towns that a man who let a door slap shut behind him was quietly marked as raised rough. The door was the cheapest kindness a man owned. A grandfather never let it close on the person at his back. Number 22. Give up the seat. On a crowded streetcar, a full waiting room, a packed church pew, you were on your feet before the older person finished looking for a place. A conductor in St. Louis gave his seat away so automatically his son thought the man had no legs of his own. You did not wait to be asked. You did not weigh whether you were tired, too. For a widow on her feet all day, a young man's empty seat was the first kindness a stranger had shown her in a week. She would go home and tell no one. She would remember it for years. Comfort kept to yourself was comfort wasted. Number 21. Take the street side. On any sidewalk, the man walked nearest the traffic, and the other walked sheltered by the buildings. A mail carrier in Lincoln switched sides without a word at every corner through 1952. His son thought it old-fashioned until the day he understood it. The gesture said whatever came off that road came through him first. No one had to ask. They simply noticed, block after block, that they had been thought of. The men who saw it knew the habit could not be faked in one evening. It was a year of quiet mornings made visible in a single corner turn. Protection given before danger arrived was the only kind that counted. Number 20. The handshake, firm, and the eyes. The handshake had a rule, and the rule was the eyes. You took a man's hand to mean it, not to crush it, and you held his gaze the whole length of it. A tool and die maker in Hamtramck made his son practice every morning in 1950. Limp grip again. Eyes down again. For a young man meeting a girl's father, that handshake was a letter of reference written in 4 seconds. Trade schools and drill sergeants alike taught it through the decade. Certain a man's grip and gaze revealed in one motion what an hour of talk could hide. The hand spoke first. The man only confirmed it. Number 19. Use the man's name. When someone gave you their name, you used it 3 times in the next 2 minutes. Once to acknowledge it, once in the middle, easily, once at the goodbye, on purpose. A hotel clerk in Kansas City taught his son this in 1952. By the 3rd use, the name was burned in, and the other person felt seen in a way they could not explain. For a man who had not heard his own name spoken with warmth in a long while, 3 uses in one conversation could be the most human moment of his month. He would remember the man who did it for the rest of his life. It was not a memory trick. It was a refusal to let anyone feel forgettable. Number 18. The handwritten thank you note. After the dinner, the favor, the loan of a truck, you sat down and wrote it out by hand. A bank clerk in Davenport wrote one for every kindness from 1948 on, and his son never saw him skip a single one. 3 lines. Ink. A stamp. Mailed inside 2 days. It cost a man a nickel and 10 minutes, and it told the receiver the kindness had been carried home and remembered. People kept those notes in drawers for 40 years. The phone call faded the moment it ended. The note sat in the drawer and kept on saying it. In 2019, researchers at the University of Chicago studied what they called first encounter trust. They expected modern adults to outperform every generation before them. They found the opposite. Adults raised with the old manners, the eye contact, the firm hand, the name spoken back, the hat in the hand, were judged more trustworthy by strangers inside 30 seconds than any group measured. The researchers were stunned. The conclusion was plain. The manners worked, not because they were old, because they were correct. We did not discard them for something better. We discarded them for nothing and called the empty space being real. Number 17, be early. On time was late. On time was late. You arrived before you were needed every single time. A railroad man in Sacramento lived by the timetable in 1950 and raised his son to treat every appointment like a departing train. The boy was never late to a job, a dinner, or a funeral in his life. To anyone waiting, a man who came early had counted their time worth more than his own comfort. Factory towns ran on it. A shift whistle did not wait, and the men raised under it carried the same clock into churches and parlors and graveyards. Lateness said your convenience came first. Earliness said theirs did, and it never had to be explained. Number 16, wait until everyone's served. At any table, no fork moved until every plate was full. A school teacher in Columbus enforced one rule in 1956. No man at this table eats while another sits hungry. You waited. You watched the table fill. You began only when the last person had been seen to. For a hungry boy after a long day, those few seconds of waiting were the first lesson in putting the room before the appetite. A guest noticed it without naming it, and felt for a moment like family. It was the oldest manner at the American table, older than any of them could trace, carried from countries none of them had ever seen. The waiting was not about the food, it was a daily proof that no one at the table ever ate alone. Number 15, walk your guest all the way out. You did not say goodbye from your chair. You stood, you walked them to the door, you waited until they were safely off down the path before you turned back inside. A cabinet maker in Grand Rapids did this for every soul who entered his house from 1949 on. He told his son the leaving was the part people remembered because it was the part you did not have to do. A guest felt the welcome had lasted to the very last second. The greeting could be politeness. The walk to the door was sincerity, and everyone could feel the difference. Number 14, don't run down the absent. When a name came up that was not in the room, you said something fair or you said nothing at all. A foreman in Akron told his son in 1953 that the man who gossips to you will gossip about you. Anyone hearing a man tear down someone who could not answer learned exactly how he would one day speak of them. The men around him learned it too, and they filed it away. Discretion was not weakness. It was a quiet promise that your name was safe in his mouth whether you stood there or not. Number 13, let a man finish. When someone was speaking, you did not step on his words to insert your own. You waited until he was fully done. A pipe fitter in Youngstown enforced it at his table in 1955, raising one finger whenever a son cut in. The man who waits hears twice what the man who jumps in hears. Anyone who could finish a thought uninterrupted in his company felt something rare, that their words carried weight, that they had been heard all the way through. Patience was not dullness. It was the loudest respect a quiet man could pay another. Number 12, offer the last of it. The last cup of coffee, the last seat by the fire, the last slice on the plate. It went to someone else before it went to you. A mill hand in Lowell never took the first or the best of anything, and his son said he went his whole life that way. You offered it around. You meant the offer. You took what was left, if anything was. For a child watching, it was the plainest lesson there was. A man's own want came last in the order of the room. The portion was small. The habit behind it was enormous. Number 11. Make the introduction. Here is the one that runs against everything young men are told now. When two people you knew stood near each other as strangers, you stepped in and introduced them, by name, with one warm word about each. A salesman in Charleston did it for everyone in 1956, certain no one should stand alone in a room he was in. It cost him nothing and built him everything. Modern advice tells a young man to work the room for himself. The grandfather worked it for everyone else, and the room loved him for it. The man who made others feel they belonged was never short of a friend. Number 10. Reach for the heavy load. The bags, the trunk, the load up the stairs. A man reached for it before anyone could ask. A dock worker in Baltimore taught his son in 1950 that strength was given to be spent on other people. A man who stood idle while an elder strained had wasted what he was handed. You saw the weight, and your hands were already on it. The lifting cost a sore back and bought a reputation that outlasted the ache. Strength shown off impressed no one. Strength quietly spent on someone weaker impressed everyone who saw it. The muscle was nothing. What a man chose to carry with it was the whole measure. Here is what nobody says out loud. 1 in 3 American men over 50 now reports having no close friends at all. Not one. Not because they are unlikable, because somewhere between 1970 and today, we replaced a culture of manners with a culture of self-expression. We stopped teaching boys how to enter a room and told them to just be themselves. But being yourself is a disaster when no one ever taught you how to be anyone. The hat off, the held door, the name spoken back, none of it charged a subscription, none of it sent a notification. It just sat in a boy's hands, learned from a grandfather, and told the truth about how he was raised. We let the grandfather die without writing it down, and we wonder why the room feels so empty now. Number 9. Pay what you owe first. A debt was paid before a single dollar went to comfort or pleasure. A streetcar operator in Cleveland settled every account the day it came due in 1952, before he bought himself so much as a cup of coffee. You did not stretch a man's patience. You did not make him ask twice. What you owed, you paid the moment you were able. For a working man, a name that was good at every counter in town was worth more than the money in his pocket. The debt paid early bought a trust that money never could. A grandfather guarded his word at the till the way other men guarded gold. Number 8. Wear your good clothes out of respect. You did not dress for yourself. You dressed for the respect of the people you were about to face. A barber in Memphis pressed his son's one good shirt every Sunday in 1951 and called a clean collar a letter of apology you never had to send. It was never about money. The barber had none. A pressed shirt on a poor man said the meeting was worth his trouble. People read care in it without knowing they were reading anything. The cloth was cheap. The respect it carried into the room could not be bought at any price. Number 7. Credit in public, correction in private. When a man did something well, you said so out loud, where others could hear it. When he did something poorly, you took him aside and said it where no one else could. A union steward in Flint taught his son this in 1953 and never got the order backward. Praise in front of the crowd, correction behind a closed door. The men he lifted in public stayed loyal to him for life. The men he corrected in private never resented him for it. Honest credit, given freely and aimed at others, cost the giver nothing and earned him everything. The generous man was never the poorest in the room for long. Number 6, knock and wait to be asked in. You did not walk into a man's home or his office or his life until you were invited. You knocked. You waited. You stood on the threshold until the word came to enter. A carpenter in Richmond taught his son in 1954 that a door was a boundary, and a boundary was a kind of respect. You let a man keep his ground. You did not push past it. For a host, the man who waited to be welcomed was the man welcomed back. The men who barged in were tolerated. The man who knocked and waited was trusted. To wait on a threshold was not weakness. It was the manners of a man who honored what was not his. Number 5, greet the whole room. When you walked in, you did not head straight for the one person you came to see. You greeted the room. A nod to the old man in the corner, a word for the child, a hand for the stranger by the wall. A shopkeeper in Providence taught his son in 1954 that no one in a room should feel passed over. You spent your hello on everyone, freely, before you spent it on the one who mattered most. The forgotten man by the wall remembered for a year the one fellow who crossed the room to him. It bought a room that was glad every time to see you come through the door. Number 4, apologize plainly, then make it right. No excuse, no long story, no soft edges. You were wrong, you said so, you set it right. A tannery worker in Milwaukee apologized to his wife in front of his son in 1956 with 4 plain words and no defense. The boy never forgot how small the words were or how much they bought. People trusted a man who could say sorry without a speech. They handed him things a man who could not apologize would never be given. The apology was short on purpose. Length is where excuses hide. A man who could not say 4 plain words would spend 40 defending himself instead. The 4 words cost a little pride. They bought back everything. In 1958, a journeyman tailor in Cincinnati spent the first 10 minutes of every fitting talking about anything but the suit. The man's family, his work, the wedding the suit was for. His apprentice asked why he gave away 10 minutes of billable time. The tailor said the 10 minutes was the work. The suit was just the part he charged for. Today, the average sale runs 4 minutes, nearly all of it the pitch. And American companies now spend $14 billion a year teaching salesmen the rapport that Taylor gave away for free. We did not get more efficient. We took the human part of every meeting, the part the old men treated as sacred, and decided it was the part we could cut. Number 3, treat the man who can do nothing for you best of all. The waiter, the porter, the man sweeping the floor. A grandfather treated each one exactly as he treated the boss. A mill hand in Lowell tipped his hat to the janitor the same as the mayor in 1950, and his son said he never saw the man's manner change for rank. This was the rule the fathers enforced above all the rest. You were not the way you treated the powerful. You were the way you treated the powerless. Anyone could be warm to a man who could help him. Only character was warm to a man who could not. The test was silent and constant, and the man who passed it was the same man in every room he walked into. Number 2, your word before witnesses was iron. What you said you would do, with others listening, you did, though it cost you, though the world changed, though no one would have blamed you for less. A tannery worker in Milwaukee promised before his whole crew in 1949 to cover a sick man's shift for a month. then worked 60 days straight when the man stayed down. His son watched him keep a word that grew heavier every week. Anyone who saw a man deliver on a hard promise stopped doubting him entirely, forever. A promise is cheapest the moment it is made, and dearest the moment it is kept. It was iron, and the whole town knew it. Number 1, pay attention. That is all of it. No method, no clever exception. You looked at the person in front of you, you listened to what they actually said, and you let them feel, for the length of that conversation, that they were the only person in the world. A schoolteacher in Terre Haute told her son in 1951 that the whole secret of being respected was to notice people fully when almost no one else bothered. The held door was attention with a hand. The remembered name was attention with a memory. The waited-out sentence was attention with patience. Every other manner on this list was only this one wearing different clothes. Leave this one in, and a man barely needs the other 24. None of these manners required a charm school, a coach, or a single dollar. They required a home where someone lived them in front of a child too young to know he was being taught. The generation that came up before 1965 understood something we have spent 50 years unlearning. A gentleman is not born, and he is not a performance. He is built from repetition. The hat lifted 10,000 times. The door held until holding it was a reflex. The name spoken back until it could not be forgotten. We called these manners stiff, old-fashioned, the kind of thing that made men who could not be themselves. We replaced them with being ourselves and called it freedom, and now we cannot understand why a crowded room can feel so empty. The manners were never lost to time. They were simply not taught. The grandfathers carried them to the grave, and no one stood in the doorway after them to pass them down. He is still there, the old man, waiting to teach. The only thing missing is someone willing to stand where he stood and mean it.